So for the past half year, it's been a half year, we've been in Joshua, okay? And for the next half year, we'll probably still be in Joshua. And the whole reason is we want to take a look at Joshua as kind of a picture of our own journey. And the main point that we want to make sure we remember is, just like Israel was trying to get to this promised land, you know, we all have our own goals, and we have these places that we feel like God wants us to go. But we get so caught up in just the destination that we forget that sometimes the journey or the process is as important. And the change that occurs is not when you get to the goal, but the change that occurs is actually as you're along in this journey. And I personally, just having to study this book and prepare, I've realized the book of Joshua is so perfect for looking at our Christian life. And the reason it's so perfect is because it's so messy. It's such a mixture of things, where you see moments of victory, right, where the people of God just are victorious, and you see moments of defeat. You see moments of celebration where they're so just joyful, and then you see moments of tragedy. You see these great men of God making mistakes and then repeating the mistakes. Right? You have these moments of intense like warfare where they're working, fighting, and then you get moments of rest, moments of reflection. And we'll talk actually about rest in a couple of weeks. Right? So it's such a good picture and a good reminder that as we're walking this road that God has set us on, and the Bible says the road is narrow, but it's a good reminder that even though that road is narrow, sometimes it's crooked too. And that's okay, because we see in the Bible that God is able to get us, despite our mistakes, to where we need to go. So we are in Joshua chapter 11. We're not even halfway, okay? Joshua chapter 11, and just to give you a recap of what's happened, can we show the map? So for the first 11 chapters, Joshua, after crossing the Jordan River, has kind of bounced around the southern half of the promised land. So they took out Jericho, and then Ai, and then there was this big battle in Bethel, and so he bounced around conquering all these nations that God needs him to drive out. And he basically divided the promised land in half. And so now we're at a spot where Joshua is going to start taking the northern part of the promised land. And here's what it says in verse 11. When Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of this, he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, and to the king of Shimron, and to the king of Akshaph, and to the kings who were in the northern hill country, and in the Arabah south of Chinneroth, and in the lowland, so all these places, okay? Verse 3, to the Canaanites in the east and the west, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites in the hill country, and the Hivites under Hermon in the land of Mizpah. Verse 4, and they came out with all their troops, a great horde, in number like the sand that is on the seashore, with very many horses and chariots. And all these kings joined their forces and came and encamped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. Okay, so a similar thing actually happened a few chapters ago, where when the southern kings heard that Gibeon had made a treaty with Israel, they all banded together. They said, let's form a group to fight God's people. So now in the northern army, well, in the northern part of the promised land, the same thing happens. This king of Hazor gets all his friends together and says, hey, there's this army that's going to come. Let's all get together and form a big army to fight against them. And there's this wording there. Can we put it back up really quick? This wording in verse 4, it says, there was a great horde in number, like the sand that is on the seashore, with very many horses and chariots. So obviously this wording, the sand that is on the seashore, is an exaggeration. But the point is, it was a huge army. And so to give us kind of a visual idea of what that looks like, I'm going to turn to my good friend Peter Jackson and his classic, Lord of the Rings, just to give you an idea of what it might be. So can we show that clip? Can we turn up the volume, Lee? So here's a big army, but look at this. That's huge. The sand on the seashore.
Courage, Mary. Courage for our friends.
Wow. Right? I mean, you couldn't even hire that many people, so they had to use computer animation to give us an idea of what that might be like, you know? And what I love about that scene is, although you have these soldiers of Rohan, right? And they're trying to be brave, especially that little hobbit. He's trying to be brave, but you sense there's this fear, isn't there? It's like in the back of your mind, he's thinking, this is going to be impossible. How can we possibly win? And they're trying to motivate themselves by screaming or whatever, but deep down there's still this sense of we're going to die. Right? There is no way we can beat this army. So the army that Joshua and Israel encounters is unlike any army they have ever seen yet. Right? This is an army with so many soldiers. And it's not just if there's a lot of soldiers, but they are the best equipped army they have ever faced. They have chariots. And back in the days, having chariots is like having some of the most advanced military weaponry of the day. So you got to think about just this idea of they're looking out into this vast army, and they've got to be thinking, there is no way we can do this. This is going to be impossible. And I think this is a good picture for us because at some point, I guarantee, whether you want to or not, you will encounter a situation or a battle that is just going to seem impossible. And you might have, like Israel just came from these fresh victories where God dropped hailstones from the sky, or God caused the wall of Jericho to fall. And you may have seen these miracles, but you come around this corner, or like that army, you come over the top of the hill, and the next thing you look at, you're thinking, oh my goodness, this is completely impossible. And I don't know what that means for us and what this battle and what this army represents for us. I mean, for some, there is some family situation that is just so out of our hands that we don't know how we can possibly change it. For some of us, it's a financial situation that just seems like we will never able to resolve it. For some of us, it's this habit or way of thinking or this lifestyle that God has said, you got to stop that lifestyle. But every time we try, it's like we have no power over it, like we cannot beat this army. For some of us, it could be some health issue. Something that, health is one of those things where you have no control over. And in some situations, the doctors don't have any control over it. Right? But no matter what it is, at some point, maybe now, you're going to face some situation, you're going to look at it and say, that's impossible. I cannot win. And we know that there's actually a little bit of that fear and that doubt in Joshua, because in the very next verse, God has to say this. Joshua chapter 11, verse 6. And the Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will give you all of them, slain to Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire. So in other words, Joshua, who had seen God do amazing things, yet when he looks at this vast army, God senses that there's fear. God senses that there's doubt, and God has to remind him Joshua, relax. Joshua, I will be with you. This is a guy who has seen God do amazing things, and yet he faces a problem that causes fear and doubt, and God had to actually remind him. I mean, think as a commander. They were not warriors. They were nomadic people. They were wandering the desert. You have to motivate this group of soldiers who are not even really soldiers, facing all these orcs and whatever else they have in Lord of the Rings, right? How do you motivate them? You can't unless God is with you. Just as a side note, this isn't the main part of the message, but I just want us to think. Where do you get your encouragement when you face things like this? Where is the source of your encouragement where you can tap in to the promises of God and be encouraged again when you feel like something is impossible? Is it just Sundays? I hope not, because we at this church always emphasize that Sundays is not ever enough for your Christian life. Is there someone in your life, like it says in Hebrews, who can stir you when you feel like giving up, when you feel like it's impossible? Where is the source of your encouragement? Are you in the Word that documents God's promises? Are you in prayer so that you give God a chance to connect you and to whisper those promises and to encourage you and to remind you, I'm with you? Where is the source of your encouragement? Right? Even Joshua, so strong, seeing so much, still needed God to encourage him at this moment. Even the strongest Christians, I don't care who you are, how long you've been at church, and what sort of miracles you've seen, you need someone or something or an avenue of encouragement when you face these sort of things. Do we have that? I mean, I think about it, this church too. Some people in the past that have just gone through some very serious situations. I think about Jared Duxfield, who has this chronic condition, and from time to time it flares up, and he spends weeks in the hospital, unable to eat, and not sure if he's going to live. And even Jared, if you guys know, who is very strong, loyal, big member of Grace Church up in Tianmu, he gets discouraged, and he has stood up here on this pulpit and said there were times where he just wanted to give up. There were times where it felt like God was far away. We all need some form of encouragement. Do we have that? And if not, what are you doing to get it? I mean, I'm not plugging it for the sake of plugging it, but that's where community groups really play a large role for this church. Is there just times where I feel burned out, and it's the other brothers and sisters who may say a word, and that reminds me of God's promises, and it reminds me that nothing is that impossible. So that's why we're so big on getting plugged into community groups. But here's kind of my main point. And if you look interested, I'll end quickly. Okay, my main point is this. There are going to be some battles that you face where victory is impossible without God. Victory is impossible without God. Not that we are incapable people. Not that we can't solve our own problems. I mean, God has given you gifts. God has given you talents. God has given you wisdom to be able to solve some things. But there are some things that just without God, victory is going to be impossible. Around this time of year is graduation season. And all over the world, you have these graduation speakers stand on stage, and they all give the same message, at least in the Western culture. Sometimes they're famous people. So here's some famous people saying some very inspirational things at graduation. The great theologian Bono, the world is more malleable or moldable, right, than you think, and it's waiting for you to hammer it into shape. J.K. Rowling, everyone know who she is? Harry Potter author, speaking at a graduation. We do not need magic to change the world. We carry all the power we need inside of us already. We have the power to imagine better. Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook, Chief Operating Officer. Believing in yourself was part of what got you to the special day. Continue to believe in yourselves Don't let anyone put limits on you. Don't put limits on yourself, right? So in all these, the message is the same. The message is you can do it, right? You can do anything you want, and you have everything it takes to be able to accomplish your dreams. And not that I am disagreeing with that. I'm not saying that the message is bad, but the message is very misleading. Because guess what? There are some things in life along the journey that we meet that we cannot do. And there are some things that we cannot overcome on our own. And that's where God has to play a role. Because the difference between just a non-Christian and a Christian is that the outcome does not depend on us. The outcome depends on Him. The outcome of the battle is not about how much effort we put in, how hard we work, how smart we are, what strategy we have to take care of this problem. The outcome depends on Him. And so the question is, are you going to make that choice when you encounter that situation to depend on Him, or are you going to try to fight it the same way you've been fighting other things on your own because you feel like you've been successful? We need to make a decision sometimes to really acknowledge that, hey, we need help. Before GPS, most men had this disease that made them incapable of asking for directions. You know what I mean? So you could be driving with one of your friends, and generally if he's a male, even when you're lost, and you say, we should stop and ask for help, the disease would not let them. Right? Even though it's clear that you cannot get to your destination, still people refuse to ask for help. Sometimes, if we're not careful, we got that same attitude. I came from a very academically driven high school where asking for help, this is so dumb, but asking for help was frowned upon because that meant that you were dumb. And so the general consensus was it's better to just kind of fake your way through it, but never ask for help because you want to look smart in front of your other peers. I work at a school that's like that. I'll edit that later. Okay, so when I got to college, right, the whole point of college is one of the things is they put you in these situations that really stretches you, and they put you in these situations where maybe you don't have the skill set or the understanding to be able to solve the problem. But my first 2 years, I refused to ask for help. And I went to a university with a 9-to-1 professor-to-student ratio. I went to a university where professors ate lunch with us and breakfast and dinners with us. So all I needed to do was turn around and ask a question. I went to a university where professors would invite us over to their houses or apartments for study sessions. And I never, ever took advantage of that in my first 2 years because I thought I could figure it out. And it wasn't until I was completely broken academically where I realized I am stupid and I must embrace my stupidity and I must ask for help that I began to have breakthrough. Are there areas in our lives where it's like that? We just refuse to ask for God's help. We just refuse to surrender and say, God, I cannot handle this. Please help me out. I mean, the only reason Israel has even been winning is because of God. He reminds them of this time and time again. Here we go, a lot of verses. Joshua chapter 10. The Lord also gave that city and its king to Israel's hand. The Lord gave, Joshua 10:32. The Lord gave Lachish into Israel's hand. Joshua 10:42, all these kings in their lands Joshua conquered in one campaign because the Lord, the God of Israel, fought for them, right? It's always God's reminding them, it's not because of you anyway. Every impossible battle was because of me, and that's the only reason you succeeded. And in our passage, Joshua chapter 11, verse 6, the Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them. So he's encouraging him, because by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them slain over to Israel. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots. Verse 8, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel. Right? It's always all been about God. And the reason is because not only are some battles impossible, I would say this. There's this saying, the Christian life is not difficult, the Christian life is impossible. I think our whole journey is impossible. You know how I know? If you read the Old Testament, everything we read about is a people who fail time and time again to please God. It's about a people who fail time and time again to live the life God has called them to live. They fail time and time again because they don't want to surrender, because they want to live their lives the way they want to live their lives. So they cannot stay under the blessing. They cannot stay in that relationship that allows them to have peace, that allows them to have blessing and influence. The entire Bible is a story of a people that fail at living the life that God asked them to live. And that's why Romans tells us it's because it's impossible without God. So not only is it these difficult health issues or financial issues, but your Christian life as a whole without God is impossible. And I wonder how many of us begin to live life without relying on the Spirit of God, without relying on the church to support us. How many of us are trying to live the Christian life by just trying harder? It's impossible. It's impossible. It gets better. So Lee, we're going to skip to the last few slides, actually. Because one of the last people that is defeated by the Israelites are these people in Joshua 11, verse 21 through 22. And Joshua came at that time to cut off the Anakim for the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from the hill country of Judah, and from the hill country of Israel. Joshua devoted them to destruction with their cities. Verse 22, there was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel. And then it goes on. Okay? So this word Anakim, the literal translation is long-necked men. Okay, that's what it means. And what it is indicating is that these people are giants. Giants. And where did we see them before? This is a very significant part of Israel's journey because these are the same giants. And I'm not going to read it actually for time. These are the same giants that when the spies first came to look at the land, they saw these long-necked people. They saw these Anakim, these giants, and they said, we cannot possibly take this land because there are giants there. And that led to people rebelling and saying, Moses, why are you trying to lead us to our deaths? We should have stayed in Egypt. And that led to the entire nation, that generation, being made to wander the wilderness for 38 years. Right? So these giants that they saw as being impossible to beat, guess what? They still had to face them. Ooh. And let me tell you something that I've realized from just my own life and looking at other people. Breakthrough and capturing all the promises of God will not happen until you face the impossible giants that you once avoided. We would like to think there are certain areas in our life, maybe it's some addiction, maybe it's some past hurt. We would like to think that we can just kind of ignore that, right? And just say, okay, God, I'm just going to get as much of the promised land as I can. I'm just going to pretend that issue is not there. I'm just going to pretend that past hurt is not influencing me. But God says, no. In order to get the fullness of what I have for you, you got to face these impossible battles with your giants. I hate that truth. Because it would just be so much nicer to assume that some problems have gone away, that time heals all wounds. Time does not heal all wounds. Time allows you to deny and grow numb. But the truth is, there are these impossible battles that you might have put aside, and God at some point is going to bring you back to say, hey, let's face this, because the outcome's not about you, it's about me. And then when this church started, on a ministry of inner healing. And if you don't know what inner healing is, it's just this process that people go through of exposing these hurts and these issues and these sins and letting God and the church deal with that. And let me tell you something. The people that have gone through inner healing are so different because they have beat the giants rather than just hoping they don't have to deal with them because they were too impossible the first time. There is no victory without God, but sometimes God's going to ask us to face the very things we wish we didn't have to deal with. Last thought. We okay? I guess I wasn't that nervous. Not only is there no victory without God, but there's no victory without obedience. Right? Part of trusting God is obeying God, isn't it? How can you trust a leader if you don't want to be led by that leader? So God reminds them time and time again in Joshua chapter 11, and I'm just going to look at verse 9. Okay, so God gives them the victory, and here's what it says in verse 9. It says, "And Joshua did to them just as the Lord said to him." So in other words, Joshua did not just believe God for the victory, Joshua obeyed everything God told him to do. And this is key from the beginning of Joshua, chapter 1. Let's look at verse 7. Way back, I don't even know, January, is that when we started this? Okay. "Only be strong and courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go." Next verse, verse 8. I believe we got it. "This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that it is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous. Then you will have good success." From the beginning of Joshua, there was this connection between what? Obedience and victory. And God let him know, hey, if you want me to support you, you got to obey. You got to do it my way. You got to do what I say, even if it doesn't make sense. See, there was always this connection between their obedience and their success. And for some of us, if we are not making progress, if we feel like life is just kind of stagnant spiritually, we have to check our hearts and say, are we willing to obey? Because we as people, we want the victory, but we want the freedom to do what we want, don't we? Every Sunday night, when my wife and I get home from church, there's this whole routine. Step 1, get the kids out of the way. Step 2, this is my confession, go to McDonald's. Okay. And step 3, we watch this show. Do we have a slide for that? What is the show? Master Chef. Okay, if you don't know what it is a cooking competition where all these amateur chefs compete. And the judges are these 3 experts in cooking and in restaurants. And so they have these very intense challenges. It's just a cooking competition. Okay, it's very exciting. I don't know why. So here's what happens all the time, which drives me crazy. These amateur cooks who don't know anything are making a mistake, and so they ask for help. And the judges will say something like, "Are you sure you want to be cooking it this way?" And they're like, "Oh, no, you're probably right. Maybe I should do what you say." And then the judges walk away, and this attitude kicks in where the amateur chef thinks, they just don't understand my style. And I'm going to do it my way anyway. And in the end, that person that asked for advice but didn't obey and still did it their way always gets eliminated. That show, guaranteed. Like, you know, this person did not listen, did not obey, they get eliminated. All the time. Right? Jesus encountered this whole idea too. There's a story of the rich young ruler. And this guy, he's rich and he's young, hence the title. And he goes up to Jesus and he asks, "Jesus, can you tell me how to get eternal life?" And Jesus tells him. He says, "Sell all you have." And he walks away sad. He asked for help. He said, "Jesus, what do I do?" Jesus says, "Here's what you do." Never mind. It's okay. Right? I mean, how sad and tragic that is. There's this battle between what we want to do and what God calls us to do. C.S. Lewis says this. This is why the real problem of the Christian life comes where people do not usually look for it. It comes the very moment you wake up each morning. All your wishes and hopes for the day rush at you like wild animals. The first job each morning consists simply in shoving them all back, in listening to that other voice, taking the other point of view, letting that other larger, stronger, quieter life come flowing in, and so on all day. Right? The moment you wake up, it's about your plans. It's not about God's plans. It's about your goals. It's about your checklist. So no wonder when the commander tells us, do this, we have such a hard time obeying it, and we have such a hard time achieving victory. Because sometimes it doesn't even make sense. If you look at the verse, God told Israel, destroy all their horses. Why? They're good horses. We could use them. There's reasons there. But sometimes God will tell you to do something that makes no sense. But God, I want to do it this way. You cannot have victory without obedience. And we have to remember, we serve a God, right, who's there for our benefit anyway. He's trying to get us somewhere good, isn't he? My son, every few days, tries to put together his wooden IKEA train set. Who's ever been to IKEA and seen that train set? Okay, a few of you guys, mostly parents, and Victor, something we don't know. Well, IKEA sells these wooden train sets, and you have to put them together yourself, right? And my son, he's 2.5. He lacks coordination. It's just bad genes, okay? And so he can't put it together. And he gets so frustrated to the point where he starts throwing things and just starts hitting things. And so you know what I have to do? I have to sit there and tell him how to do it. I say, Timmy, you put this in there and it'll work fine. And he does it. And it works. And he's happy. Am I impinging on his freedom by telling him to do it my way? No. Nobody would think I'm oppressing my child by giving him these instructions and asking him to obey. I'm actually freeing him to do more than he could have, aren't I? And it's the same thing, right? When God asks us to do something, God is trying to take us to a place where we could do and accomplish so much more than we could on our own. But unless we understand that God has a destination and a process for that, our human nature will resist and want to do it our way. Right? Famous anthem of the 90s. I want it that way. I'll edit that. So here's what I want to do for just about 10 minutes. We're a small enough group, so this actually works. I want us to break up into groups of 3 or 4, as we've done before. I know this is kind of nervous for some who are new here, so no pressure, okay? But just, I figure we'd have a smaller group, so it's a good chance to do that. But before we break up into groups, I talked about encouragement. Okay? I want you, just for a few moments, to think about either one verse or one story or one idea. It doesn't even have to be like a Christian verse that encourages you. When you're facing something difficult, you turn to this, and then you start getting encouraged. And the reason I want us to do that is I'm going to ask you later on to share what that is, if you feel comfortable. Because I think oftentimes, it's not like God is going to come and speak to us and say, be strong and courageous. Oftentimes, God speaks through a person. So maybe today, you are going to be the voice of God to encourage another brother or sister. And the reason why it doesn't have to be Christian is because I think all truth comes from God. So there are actually a lot of secular sayings that I think have biblical truth to them. I think it's okay to kind of use that in your life, okay? So just take a few moments to think about that, and then we'll break up into groups and just quickly discuss, and then we'll be out of here.